I would have had this up this morning, but it's been a crazy day for hockey, and I don't think it's necessarily over. But I need to get the NFL Power Rankings up because it is Tuesday. I figured today I'd wear my San Diego Chargers t-shirt because I often still call them San Diego because to me they're the San Diego Chargers. And when I hear LA Chargers, I go, that's not right. It's just not right. So over here we've got the standings, so I'll discuss the standings a little bit as we are up to that stage of the year where about half the teams on this board, thanks for coming out, you guys aren't making the playoffs. Now, number 32, I could basically just plaster this there, outscored 292 to 157. The only team in football right now that is actually eliminated from the playoffs. 100% eliminated, Cincinnati. Take a bow, applaud yourselves. You're going to go on 16. You've earned it. And yeah. Number 31 being outscored 269 to 144. And it's Washington. So Washington, that's been so far down for so long, I don't have a win this week putting them any higher than 31st. I can't. Well, I guess I could, but I didn't. So there you go. So Washington's 31st. You'll notice they're not in the standings side of things either because we're not up to that stage. Number 30, outscored 308 to 217 so far this year. The New York Giants, who also do not feature on the standings part of the board because while they're not technically eliminated from the playoffs, they're not making the playoffs. So yeah, for the Giants, it's been a long season. It continues to be a long season, and now you're looking ahead to the draft and next year and life without Eli Manning, all that other wonderful stuff. Number 29, being down 346 to 163 overall. That is a miserable differential. However, Miami finds themselves in 29th because the three teams below them are somehow more hapless than they are. It's quite the season that Miami's had. They were expected to be 31st or 32nd all season, and here they are at 29th. So probably feeling pretty good about themselves. I'm not going to say there's going to be a parade, but there's not going to be a parade. Number 28, having lost by a combined score of 217 to 175, is Denver. Denver also not on the board. And when you look at the combined score, 217 to 175, that means they're not losing by a ton for the most part. Their differential's still not bad. There are some teams on this board that their differential's actually not horrible when you look at points allowed versus points scored. They just can't get the victory when they need them, so they end up down in this area. So for Denver, 28th is where they reside this week. 27th, having lost by a combined score of 258 to 198. And moving on up is the Jets. New York, they're the better of the two New York teams. That's, I guess, the best praise I can give the Jets right now. They're the best of the two New York teams. And we'll see whether or not they can end up finishing at 6-10. 6-10 would be a decent sign that things are getting better. And honestly, it looks like from this season, there are some positives you could get out of this if you're a Jets fan. Absolutely. Number 26, losing by a combined score of 297 to 242. So 55 points overall is Atlanta, who, again, 52 points down. But I think their record's, 3-7? So overall, or 3-8, somewhere in that area. It's not great. Could be 2-9, 3-9. Anyways, it's not great. They're not making the playoffs. I don't have them on this side of the board. But you know what? Could they find themselves out of the bottom row? Well, probably not. Probably not going to happen. Let me just go ahead and make a small adjustment here. And I can up the brightness just a little bit, which increases the glare on the board. See? And then I've got the light right there. So, again, apologies for this being late, but like I said, the hockey world right now and I could still be doing hockey videos right now on other things that have come out since the last video I did. But anyways, number 25, these guys have lost by a combined score of 317 to 248. It's Arizona. And the Cardinals are another one that they lose by close scores, and you can go, well, I could say that they're better than other teams ahead of them, right? But again, they're not winning the games, so you're not winning the games, you're not going to be able to get out of this bottom row. There are good teams in this bottom row. They just haven't had any breaks this year. I would expect next year we see at least one or two of these teams in the playoffs at this time next year. Number 24. Are we getting into a team that's now... These guys have outscored their opposition 224 to 218, but they're 4-7, and don't let it fool you. The Chargers are 24th, and they could find themselves in the bottom row before the end of the year because they've been there already once this year. Right directly above Cincinnati. That's how that works. And, for the Chargers, I wear their gear. At least this year they're not breaking my heart like they did last year when they lost to New England. And everybody told me, no, the Chargers should beat New England. New England's on their way down. And I was like, don't get my hopes up. And then I kind of did. And then I felt like I was dumb after because, no. Number 23, being outscored by a combined score of 264 to 209. The Jaguars, who are kind of spinning their wheels. They traded out Jalen Ramsey after he requested it. And Jalen Ramsey was involved in a little bit of a happiness with the guy who's traded out to make room for him this week. So, football, there's a lot of happiness going on between teams. And, hey, I noticed you're with my old team. Congratulations. Thanks for the fact you got traded out so there was room for him. I'm sure that's how the conversation went. Anyways, Jacksonville, maybe next year. Maybe. I don't think they've been that bad. Number 22, being outscored a total of 291 to 260. And it's Detroit, and I have tried to keep Detroit up there. I have. And yet, they just keep losing. So, with the losses they've suffered, I believe they're at 4 in a row right now. Yeah, I can't justify Detroit being any higher than 22nd. It's just not a thing. Detroit, 22nd? Yeah, that sounds about right. Number 21, being outscored 335 to 312. And hard luck franchise, definitely Tampa Bay. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say next year at this time they should be a playoff team. They've had a lot of bad breaks. Cardinals fans could state that as well. A lot of bad breaks here and there, and if that goes your way, you're in good shape. The Buccaneers, I think, should get better next season. But if you're a Buccaneers fan, you're like, I heard that before. As a Chargers fan, I can relate. Number 20. Being outscored a total of 252 to 233. And you know what? Cleveland, technically I could have put them on the board and said they have a chance. But here's the thing. So they're 5-6. There is a chance in that Pittsburgh's in there at 6-5. I'm wondering how are they going to mess this up? Because there's 3 other teams that are 6-5 too. So how does Cleveland take a scenario where if they win... Say they go 9-7, they may very well make the playoffs. How did they mess that up? But that means going 4-1 from here, and I don't know that they have that in them. Number 19, 118 points for, 118 points against. They're still technically alive at 5-6, and that's Chicago. Now, where it becomes a challenge for Chicago, and I really don't think that anybody who's not in this realm is going to end up making it, is that your wild cards are Seattle and Minnesota. So your division leader is Green Bay. Chicago being in that division, they're not going to catch Green Bay. Odds are they're not going to catch the 8-3 Minnesota Vikings either. So they're on the board. They're alive, but realistically, it's not going to happen. If you're 5-6 in the NFC and you're not in the same division as Dallas, you're very unlikely to make it. Number 18, being outscored a total of 247 to 243, is the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't know what's going on with the Eagles, but they're 5-6. They're 1 game back of Dallas. There's going to be a mediocre division winner in that division. Whether it's Dallas or Philadelphia, that team should go out relatively quickly in the playoffs. But it's a 1-game situation, so they won't be playing at home, but odds are one of these division winners with a mediocre record, in at least here in the NFC. AFC odds are all 4 teams should have good records that win the division, but in a 1-game situation, you could win. In the Eagles' case, it's quite possible, but they've got some work to do to catch Dallas. Dallas has got some work to do too. Number 17, outscoring their opposition by a total of 216 to 212. And in the last playoff position right now in the AFC is Pittsburgh because of all of the tiebreakers. I didn't write all the tiebreakers on the board, but with the tiebreakers being as they are, Pittsburgh is right now in that last playoff spot. And that would be an interesting position for them to be in as underdogs. I would be scared to death of playing the Steelers, even though Rudolph ended up being out and their backup being needed to play and all the drama that's going on there. You know what? This team gets in the playoffs. I'm not going to roll them out because they're the Steelers. So yeah, we're into the playoff situations now. Number 16 being outscored a total of 284 to 228. And they are right below that playoff line, and it's Oakland. So Oakland's lingering around, and don't forget they're only one game behind Kansas City for that division. I can't see them catching Kansas City, but Kansas City doesn't look quite as uncatchable as they did early in the season. And Oakland has been very unpredictable. Notice their differential is really negative. They tend to get blown out. But they've had some interesting wins this year as well, and they are still technically at 6-5. Very alive for the playoffs. Number 15 outscored by a total of 291 to 259. These guys are 5-6. They're not making the playoffs, and that's the Carolina Panthers. I can't see them turning it around. I just can't see it. So I would imagine next week at this time they're likely down in that row if Oakland and Pittsburgh have a good week. But yeah, for Carolina, it's been a bad break. They got off to a slow start this year, and it looked like they'd recovered, and now they're back down to 5-6. At 14th on the board, outscoring their opposition 245 to 217. They're at 6-5. They're below the playoff line, and that's Tennessee. So they need to keep winning. They may need some help, but Tennessee could absolutely get in and snag a spot. And I think Tennessee, I'd be a little bit less afraid of in a playoff game, in a one-off playoff game, than Pittsburgh, but it's only mildly different between the two. Number 13, outscoring their opposition 244 to 226, and also below the playoff line at 6-5 is Indianapolis. So right now the Colts not in the playoffs, which would be almost criminal, but at the same time they're still in the running for that division as well with Houston. Houston sitting at 8-4, so that division is still pretty wide open, and Indianapolis could very well be a team that comes in as an underdog. And again, you have a one-game playoff in football, and at the very least in wild card weekend you may see upsets. It's that second week where your Cinderella teams usually fall by the wayside. Number 12, outscoring opposition 249 to 243, and outside the playoffs, the Rams. They're 6-5, and they're highly unlikely to make it because San Francisco's the division leader at 10-5. Seattle's next up at 9-2. The math for the Rams to get into the playoffs is challenging, which is very surprising considering what was expected of the Rams this season. So this is where things are a little different in between conferences, where Pittsburgh at 6-5, they've got a good chance of making it. The Rams at 6-5, very, very little chance of making it. And yet they could finish with a better record than a division winner. So that's where the playoff setup in the NFL gets kind of tricky. And this is why when other sports talk about 4-team divisions, I get nervous, because there seems to always be a 4-team division in the NFL where the team that wins and makes the playoffs probably shouldn't be in there, and you can point to a team that finished just below the playoff line and should have been in there. But this is the situation, this is the scenario, and for the Rams, it's one that's very challenging about whether or not they're going to actually be able to make the playoffs. Number 11, outscoring their opposition 295 to 210, and their 6-5 somehow is Dallas. Dallas shoot themselves in the foot as much as anybody else. They looked fantastic to start the season. I believe they started 3-0 or 4-0, and since then it's been a challenge for them. As good as Dak Prescott is, there's limits. And yet, if they make the playoffs with Dak Prescott and they win their division, who knows? You have, at the very least, winning your division. Of course, you're hosting a wild card team. In this case, it would be Buffalo. Not Buffalo. I'm looking at the wrong side of the board. In this case, it would be Seattle. So, yeah, right now it would be Dallas and Seattle and Green Bay and Minnesota if the playoffs started today in the NFC. So, in the AFC, it'll be Pittsburgh and Houston and Kansas City and Buffalo. So, some interesting matchups there, huh? Anyways, for Dallas, if they were at home against Seattle, thanks for coming out. The way they've been playing, I think Seattle would take them down. But can you imagine the points that could be scored if Prescott and Wilson were both on it that day? Anyways, number 10, outscoring the opposition 265 to 249. And currently at 7-4, leading their division, Houston. Houston should win that division. I think they're the best team in the division, but at 7-4, that means they've lost 4 out of 11. They kind of have to go, I would think 10-6 should win that division. Yeah, 10-6 should win that division. But, again, we'll see how things go for them down the stretch. Number 9, and they've outscored the opposition 231 to 173. They're 8-3. They're going to be a wild card team. It's Buffalo. Depending on who you ask, either the most underrated or they could be the most overrated. They could be seen as a fraud. They could be seen as a team that's flying under the radar and could terrify teams in the playoffs. I'll be very interested to see how Buffalo does in the playoffs. For instance, Buffalo, if they were playing Kansas City in wildcard weekend, that would be a crazy matchup. And between their defense and the offense that Kansas City can throw out there, and then you've got to think it'd be a cold weather atmosphere, which both teams should be completely comfortable with. That could be a great game. So yeah, Buffalo at number 9. Now we're into the top row. Number 8, outscoring the opposition 308 to 256. Also at 7-4, Kansas City. I say also because Houston was at 7-4. So technically their record is not as strong as Buffalo's, but people will tell you, hey, but look at Buffalo's schedule, to which Buffalo fans will say, you play the schedule you're given. And yeah, Kansas City 7-4. I can't see them falling out of the playoffs. When you look at the fact 6-5 right now gets you in, I can't see a scenario where they don't make the playoffs at the very least. And honestly, I can't see them not winning that division. I'd be very surprised if they didn't win that division as it's currently constituted, because you've got Kansas City here, Oakland down here. I can't see Oakland taking down Kansas City, and then anybody else in the division is just it's not there. Number 7, outscoring the opposition 258 to 242. And right now they're the division leader. They're 8-3, and that's Green Bay. And I had to drop them at least a spot based on this week's result. Now you can look and say, well, look who they played, right? But look how they played. So Green Bay, I honestly thought about dropping them further down than that, but they're still 8-3, so I can't drop them down further than that. But boy, after that result, there's part of me that says you've kind of got to, but I couldn't put them below Kansas City. That being said, number 6, outscoring their opposition 289 to 205, and losing a tiebreaker to Green Bay, Minnesota. So that tiebreaker right now favors Green Bay in that they beat Minnesota in the head-to-head matchup they've had so far this season. Both teams 8-3. This could be quite the fight for who's going to win the division. And it would be amazing if Minnesota somehow won the division, considering the early season frustrations with Cousins, if now they ended up winning the division. But it's quite the fight they're going to have, and I'm anxious to see how that one turns out. Number 5, outscoring the opposition 300 to 117 and 10-1. And the only reason we're not talking about New England as being tops in the entire NFL is their opponents. Now, I believe it was Dallas that they beat this week. They look pretty good in that, but there's some reason to be concerned with the New England Patriots. There is. And for me, I still have them at 5th behind these 4 other teams. Now, I thought about moving them up to 4th, but the team that's in 4th has looked pretty good. They're 9-2. They've outscored their opposition 272 to 230 on the season. And New Orleans has looked, like I said, pretty good. And they're 9-2, and they're going to be dangerous in the playoffs. You could justify having New England ahead of New Orleans. It wouldn't bother me. I just couldn't drop New Orleans this week. Like I said, 9-2. And for New England, I think the big thing with New England that we're finding out is that their defense might be good enough to win them Super Bowl. So even if Brady's older and we see some effects in this year's postseason, he's not putting up the kind of numbers he used to, that defense for New England may very well take them all the way, at the very least to a Super Bowl. appearance and maybe to winning the championship trophy as well. Be very interesting to see what happens. Although right now everybody's excited because they know who's going to be in the Super Bowl. They're pretty sure. Number 3, outscoring their opposition 292 to 263. And at 9-2, I have actually dropped Seattle down to 3rd. The game that San Francisco played this week was so fantastic that even though Seattle won their matchup this week, I couldn't look at that and say, well, I'll just leave it as it is, because that's not how power rankings work. You're supposed to be going by who right now is playing the best football. And in a league where you've got 16 games, it can be kind of hard to separate that out. Like I said, there are teams that are further down that if you played the kind of schedule you see in other sports, and you can never do that in football, it's too physically demanding, but I think some of the teams that are currently not in the playoffs over a 50-game schedule, if you had like just 50, you'd see quite a different standing, I would think. But we play what we're given. Like I said, with the whole schedule thing, and Seattle dropped back a little bit this week because at number 2, outscoring their opposition 332 to 163 are the Niners, which means that outscoring their opposition 386 to 202, Baltimore. And what an absolute, complete, and total ass-kicking Baltimore put on this week. That was a clinic by the Ravens. That was an absolute embarrassment that the Ravens throttling. It was the Rams, right? Uh-huh. Yeah. So the Ravens absolutely throttled the Rams this week. Absolutely, just the kind of result that it stings, because that's a game they had to win. And not only did they not win it, they not won it big time. And so, yeah, this matchup, everybody's going to be watching and saying, hey, San Francisco and Baltimore, that's going to be the Super Bowl. I can't say that won't be. I think that the teams in each conference that will have a say in it, I think Seattle will have a say in the NFC, and I think New England will have a chip on their shoulder about Baltimore. And I would think that if these teams meet in the playoffs, again, if that's your 2 matchups, that could be a very, very fascinating conference championships to witness if it was New England, Baltimore, San Francisco, and Seattle. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. And for Baltimore at 9-2, it doesn't get much better. And honestly, they've got that Division 1 right now. And for San Francisco at 10-1, they're still just 1 game ahead of Seattle. Seattle won't go away, but I don't think that San Francisco, after the way they played this week, I don't think Seattle's going to end up catching them. Or will they? Let me know your thoughts regarding that, and just who you think's going to win the Super Bowl right now. And why is it the Patriots? Because it's always the Patriots, right? All right, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. This channel just passed 10,600 subscribers this week, so that's kind of fun. Thank you guys so much, and I will talk to you again soon.